Hi, I'm Dave Isaacs, and this week in Core Concepts, I want to talk about rules. Specifically, how you want to learn the rules, but learn from the rule breakers. And first, I want to point out that there seems to be something of a philosophical split among musicians when it comes to things like rules, and I feel compelled to make air quotes every time I say the word rules. I'm not going to, but you get the idea. I want to begin with the idea that just because I'm using the word rule, it doesn't mean we're talking about some monolithic thing that can never be broken or never be challenged. Some people are adamant that you have to know the rules, and that's whether we're talking about rules of music theory, rules of technique, or rules of style, and I want to address all of those things. First of all, talking about music theory, you hear people saying things like, well, you have to know the rules before you can break them. I'm not sure that's entirely true, because there are so many great musicians over the years that were completely unschooled, certainly didn't know anything about music formally, but wrote great music that works unquestionably. When something is undeniable, when you know that it's music that millions of people love and respond to, it's kind of hard to say, well, okay, that's great, but it doesn't follow the rules. What I would suggest to you is that if you're talking about music theory, they're not actually rules at all. On the other side is the person who feels that learning the rules will be a creative straitjacket, will be somehow limiting, or even somewhat superstitiously will be something that interferes with their connection with their creativity. And I had a student tell me one time about a successful songwriter that said something to that effect. He said something to the effect of, I don't want to know about any of that music theory stuff. I got to stay pure. Which really sounds superstitious to me. It's almost like saying, well, if I learn what I'm supposed to do, then I won't be able to do anything interesting anymore. Personally, I think that's nonsense. I think that's admirable faith in his muse. But at the same time, I would suggest to you that that line of thinking is actually more likely to make you repeat yourself and do the same kinds of things over and over, unless you're making a conscious decision to try to change it. And that has nothing to do with whether or not you know the rules, whether or not you know anything about music or music theory. I think a lot of people have a fundamental misunderstanding of what music theory actually is and what it really means. That music theory is not rules necessarily, it's not laws like traffic laws. It's more like laws of nature. Music theory is a set of principles that explains why the notes that work well together do sound good together. And if you learn the formulas and the math, you only have a partial understanding of what's going on. Because when something does work, when somebody with an intuitive understanding of music does something that seems to break the rules, there's a principle of music theory that probably explains why that sound works. That if music theory is there to explain to you why things sound good together, and something does sound good, it does make logical sense that that explanation is there somewhere in the larger sense of what music theory means. And I think that's really important. I have a degree in music. I have 2 degrees in music, actually. I've learned all the theory I would care to ever want to know in a lot of ways. And some of it I use and some of it I don't. Some of it I use every day. It's definitely very helpful for me to have the larger understanding of music when it comes to either how to approach learning a song, how to improvise over something, how to create a part, or how to write a song or a piece of music. And I find that knowing theory is really helpful to me in terms of understanding when I do want to find another choice, what my immediate choices might be, or what I might want to rule out if I want to try something different. It gives me an idea of where to go if I want to avoid the norm. So that information does not lock me into the same patterns all the time. And as I said, in referring to this songwriter that talked about wanting to stay pure, I think almost everybody has their patterns that they use, whether they know it or not. And many, many people come to me, songwriters in particular, saying, I feel like I'm just coming up with the same things over and over again. I need to add to my vocabulary. And that's a potential downside of not knowing enough about music to know when you can make other choices. Now let's talk about technique. I don't really believe there's a right and wrong to how you should approach the instrument. I think that there are two sides to this, though, or two aspects, and one of them is a variable and one of them isn't. The variable is that all of us are proportioned a little bit differently, and that guitars, while they're basically made the same way, do have differences in the size of the body, the scale of the neck, the shape of the neck, and there are variables between the demands of different styles of music. On the fixed side, body is a body, hands are hands, a guitar is a guitar, for the most part. In other words, we're all working with the same basic tools, which are constructed in the same way and operate according to the same laws of mechanics, the same natural laws of physics. So, with that said, it stands to reason that there is an optimal approach. And if you're looking at it from an ergonomic perspective, that optimal approach would be to maximize sound and minimize effort. I think that's a great place to start. And that is what I teach. I think that ultimately, when you explore that, you find that it's the best way to go because it's the easiest way to approach things and be able to move fluidly and get around the instrument. And I would suggest to you here that, again, anyone that's self-taught, if they're really intuitive and tuned in and paying attention, they're going to come to that ergonomic approach because it is the most natural way. It's in accordance with the way we are made and the guitar is made. With that said, there are still times when somebody has technique that no teacher is ever going to teach, and yet they're great players, and there's no denying that. I think that when that happens, you either have just such a unique person in the way that they relate to the instrument physically, that they've found their own way, or, I think more frequently, when someone's technique is wasteful, not optimal. I hate to use the word wasteful, but when someone's technique isn't up to the ideal ergonomic standard, it's a result of a lack of control or a lack of awareness. Because the fact is, if something is easier and more natural to do for your body, seems like you should be more comfortable doing it. And so if you're not, there's a reason, and that reason is going to be either A, you don't notice, or B, there's some other reason that you aren't taking that approach. Maybe there are things that you might change to get a different sound or to be able to make a particular reach. Like a good example is the way that the position of the fretting hand, thumb, and wrist will change depending on what you're trying to reach and where you are on the neck. That's an important variable that not everybody takes into account. But you have to recognize that while there is an ideal, there are also the variables, and that good playing comes from striking the sweet spot between that ideal and those variables of how you are made, what you're trying to do, and how your guitar is made. Now, the last area where we come up against this idea of rules has to do with style. Now, style is defined by sound. There are particular choices that musicians make to make a song sound like it's in one style or another. And if you're trying to be faithful to that style, then there are certain things that you need to do. But within that, where do you draw the line on how faithfully you're imitating the people you're trying to learn from? The thing that's interesting to me is that I find there are people who are absolutely doctrinaire and insisting there are absolutes in imitating people that were mavericks, that were rule breakers, that were not following the rules, that found their own way of doing things. And if you are really looking to learn the ins and outs of somebody's style, there's a lot to be gained from that. And the average player and the average listener wants to hear the song played the way they know it. As a performer, you need to keep that in mind. As a fan, that really may be your motivation, that you want to hear the music the way you're used to hearing it. But at the same time, everyone has their own musical filter. And those people that were mavericks, those people that had the most unique and, in a lot of ways, influential styles, are the people whose filter was just different than everybody else's, more unique. that brought in maybe other influences or more influences, or there was just something about their personality that took what they heard and changed it so that when it came out, filtered through their musical sensibility, it created something completely new. And I think if you look at the history of music, you will find that the most influential people in any style are the ones who did just that. Are the rule breakers, are the mavericks, are the people that went their own way. So as a student, yeah, as a fan even, it's great to really get inside a style and learn the ins and outs. But at the same time, you don't need to become the jazz police or the blues police or the country police or whatever it is and say, you can't play it that way. Now, it depends on the situation, depends on the gig. If you're in a particular project that's trying to do a particular thing, yes, you have an obligation to fit in, to play the music the way that it is meant to be played according to the demands of that situation. But that's not always the case. And the fact is, even if you are looking to restrict yourself to a particular sound, particular vocabulary, for whatever reason that you're doing that, you still stand to learn a lot by looking at the people that push the boundaries. So you might gather from this that I don't believe we're talking about a real split, even though it seems that way, between people that say learn the rules and people that say ignore them. I think the truth is that the rules exist for a reason. They are combinations of things that work, and so they're worth taking into account, but there are also differing situations and lots of physical and musical variables to take into account as well. So the bottom line is, learn the rules. There's a lot of value to it, but look at the rule breakers, understand what they did differently, and pay attention to why it works. That will make you the kind of open-minded player that hopefully you're striving to be.